The year was 2015, as the golden sunset illuminated the rugged peaks of the Sangre de Cristo mountains, painting the New Mexico sky in fiery crimson and deep purple. A metallic glint flashed from beneath the crumbling floorboards of an abandoned ranch house. The reflection, brief but unmistakable, would lead Sarah Connor to a discovery that had remained hidden for over a century, protected by desert winds and family secrets. A solitary figure moved carefully through the dilapidated rooms, testing each step on the weathered pine floors with a practiced caution that spoke of military training. Sarah paused at the edge of the kitchen, her experienced eyes scanning the structural damage ahead. The sunlight streamed through a collapsed section of roof, illuminating decades of dust and neglect, but also revealing something unusual, a faint, rectangular outline that didn't match the random patterns of decay surrounding it. What she discovered that evening, beneath the forgotten ranch house, would forever alter her life and rewrite the history of the entire valley. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're intrigued by what you're about to learn, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've saved something extraordinary about another lost treasure that you won't want to miss. Sarah Connor, former Army Corps of Engineers specialist and now a single mother of 2 teenage boys, stood in what remained of the kitchen, staring at the strange outline on the floor. The property, 50 acres of high desert scrubland with a dilapidated ranch house and 3 outbuildings, had been a desperate gamble. At 38, with her military pension stretched thin and limited job opportunities in rural New Mexico, the foreclosed property had seemed like their last chance to start over. Rock-bottom real estate for a rock-bottom life, she had joked to her sons when they first saw the crumbling adobe and wood structure 3 weeks earlier. The bank had practically given it away, $53,000 for 50 acres and structures that hadn't seen maintenance in at least 2 decades. The boys, Jake and Ryan, had exchanged that silent teenage look that spoke volumes about their mother's questionable decision-making, but they had followed her inside anyway, loyal despite their doubts. The home inspection had revealed exactly what Sarah expected. Foundation issues, electrical systems that predated safety codes, a well that needed rehabilitation, and enough repair work to keep them busy for years. What the inspector hadn't found, what no one had found for generations, was the secret beneath the kitchen floor, hidden under layers of linoleum, plywood, and original hardwood. Sarah had been replacing a rotted floor joist that afternoon when her pry bar had punched through unexpectedly, the wood giving way to empty space below. Initial irritation had quickly transformed to curiosity as she peeled back more flooring, revealing what appeared to be a trapdoor fitted so seamlessly into the original construction that it had remained undetected through multiple renovations and abandonment. In that moment, as dust motes swirled in the beams of fading sunlight, Sarah made a decision that defied conventional wisdom about old houses and potential hazards. 20 years of military training had taught her to assess risks methodically, but something about this discovery bypassed her usual caution. This wasn't just an unexpected structural feature. It was deliberately concealed, designed to remain hidden unless someone was systematically rebuilding the floor. This is the remarkable story of Sarah Connor and the legacy hidden beneath the floorboards of Esperanza Ranch. The trapdoor resisted at first, decades of settled dust creating a natural seal around its edges. Sarah worked carefully, inserting the thin edge of her pry bar and applying gentle pressure, mindful that whatever lay beneath might be fragile. When the door finally surrendered, with a reluctant groan of ancient hinges, stale air rushed upward, carrying the unmistakable mineral scent of underground spaces, cool, damp, and undisturbed for what must have been generations. Her tactical, Flashlight revealed a narrow wooden ladder descending into darkness. Sarah hesitated, years of combat engineer training screaming cautions about structural integrity and potential hazards. The rational choice would be to close the trapdoor, call a professional to assess the space, perhaps even notify the Historical Society. Instead, she found herself securing the ladder and beginning a careful descent, the soldier in her calculating risks, while the new homeowner felt an irresistible pull toward this unexpected mystery. The ladder extended about 10 feet down, opening into what appeared to be a hand-excavated tunnel reinforced with timber supports. The construction was old, but remarkably sound, the work of someone who understood mining techniques and structural requirements. The tunnel stretched roughly 15 feet before intersecting with a larger passage that extended in both directions beyond the reach of her flashlight beam. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, her voice absorbed by the earthen walls. This wasn't some small root cellar or storm shelter. This was something far more extensive and purposeful. A hidden system beneath a seemingly unremarkable ranch house in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. Her inspection revealed construction techniques that dated back to the late 1800s, consistent with mining operations that had once dominated the region. Yet this tunnel system didn't appear on any of the property documents, surveys, or historical records she had reviewed before purchasing. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create this underground network and then ensure its existence remained unrecorded. Choosing the passage that led roughly eastward, Sarah advanced cautiously, noting the subtle downward grade and the increasingly sophisticated timber reinforcements. Approximately 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a chamber roughly 12 feet square, its walls lined with rough-hewn shelving. The flashlight beam revealed several metal boxes, leather-bound ledgers, and rolled documents secured with faded ribbon. Sarah approached a metal box that appeared less affected by time than the others. Its latch, though tarnished, yielded to gentle pressure. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well, was a leather folio containing hand-drawn maps, their ink faded but still legible. The largest map depicted an intricate tunnel system extending well beyond the boundaries of her property, with notations in Spanish and English, including recurring symbols that resembled mining claims. One notation, written in careful script, along the margin, sent a chill of recognition through Sarah's body. Primary shaft to the Los Lobos silver vein. Concealed entrance behind north wall of second explosives chamber. The Los Lobos silver mine was not unfamiliar to Sarah. Though now relegated to local legend, it had once been among the most productive silver operations in territorial New Mexico before mysteriously playing out in 1887. Local law claimed the Spanish had discovered extraordinary silver deposits in the mountains, but had concealed the most valuable veins, intending to return after the indigenous uprising subsided. Treasure hunters had searched for the legendary lost veins for generations without success. Yet here in her hands, Sarah held what appeared to be detailed maps to not just the known portions of Los Lobos, but extensive documentation of concealed tunnels and unworked veins that had never entered historical record. As the implications sank in, Sarah carefully rewrapped the documents. The responsible approach would be to contact historical authorities, perhaps even the state mining department. These materials likely had significant historical value, potentially even legal complications regarding mineral rights. The rational decision was clear, but Sarah's life had fallen apart precisely by following expected paths. Her military career, her marriage to a fellow officer, their plans for stability and future security, all had collapsed despite her meticulous adherence to the proper steps and procedures. Now, standing in a hidden chamber beneath a last-chance property purchase, holding maps to what might be a fortune in undiscovered silver, the path forward seemed anything but clear. Sarah spent another hour exploring the immediate tunnel system, before reluctantly climbing back to the kitchen. Night had fallen while she was underground, and the distant howl of coyotes reminded her that some secrets were best investigated in daylight. She carefully repositioned the trapdoor and placed a heavy cabinet over it, partly for safety with the boys around, but also from an instinctive desire to protect her discovery until she could determine her next steps. She found Jake and Ryan in the main room of the small travel trailer they were living in while renovating the house. Homework spread across the folding table, microwave burritos half-eaten, their faces illuminated by laptop screens. At 16 and 14, they had weathered the turbulent collapse of their parents' marriage with remarkable resilience, following their mother across the country without complaint when her ex-husband's deployment had extended indefinitely, leaving her to rebuild their lives alone. "You're dusty," Jake observed without looking up from his calculus. "Found more rot in the joists?" Sarah hesitated, an unusual moment of indecision. She had never kept significant secrets from her sons, viewing honesty as the foundation of their family unit. Yet something held her back from revealing the tunnel system immediately, not fear they would explore unsafely. Both boys had inherited her methodical caution, rather an instinct to verify what she had found before, potentially raising hopes about its significance. "Just the usual century of neglect," she replied, moving toward the trailer's tiny bathroom. "But I think the kitchen foundation is better than we thought. Might save us some money." That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Sarah spread the county survey maps across the trailer's table, comparing them with photos she had taken of the tunnel diagrams. The underground system appeared to extend beyond her property boundaries, primarily eastward into what was now national forest land. If the maps were accurate, the main shaft to the legendary Lost Silver Vein was located approximately 2 miles from her kitchen floor, beneath a rocky outcropping that featured on modern hiking trails as an unremarkable scenic viewpoint. Sleep proved elusive as questions multiplied. Why had someone gone to such lengths to conceal not just the maps, but an entire access tunnel system? Who had built the ranch house above this secret entrance, and had they known what lay beneath? Most pressingly, what legal and ethical obligations surrounded such a discovery? Sarah's phone showed no service, a common occurrence in their remote location. Internet access through their satellite dish was equally unreliable, particularly at night. Answers to her questions would require research in town, a 30-minute drive to the small library in Socorro with its local history collection. As dawn lightened the eastern mountains, Sarah made a decision. Before involving authorities or even telling her sons, she needed to verify whether the tunnel system actually matched the maps and whether it genuinely connected to what might be the legendary Lost Silver Mine. One exploration, conducted with proper safety precautions, would either confirm the historical significance of her find or reveal it as an elaborate wild goose chase from another century. Sarah had spent 8 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. Before transitioning to civilian life, underground structures, structural integrity assessment, and air quality monitoring were familiar territory. She had served in Afghanistan, evaluating abandoned Soviet bunker systems and naturally occurring cave networks for military utilization. If anyone could safely explore this tunnel system, it was her. The rising sun found her sorting through storage boxes in one of the outbuildings, assembling equipment from her military days that she had never quite been able to leave behind. Every day, professional-grade gas detector that measured oxygen, carbon monoxide, and methane levels, a tactical helmet with mounted lights, ropes and basic climbing gear, emergency medical supplies, and a detailed mapping system that calculated distances using stride length and directional changes. By mid-morning, she had created a plausible reason for solitude. driving the boys into town for school with instructions to catch a ride home with their friend's mother after their part-time jobs at the local grocery store. This would give her approximately 8 hours to conduct an initial exploration before needing to account for her whereabouts. Returning to the ranch, Sarah changed into durable canvas pants and a long-sleeved shirt, strapped on knee and elbow, protection, and methodically checked her equipment. The tactical approach felt familiar, a return to skills that had defined her professional identity before divorce and financial necessity had reduced her to struggling single mom status. In the mental checklist and equipment verification, she recognized the woman she had been before life's complications had intervened. Focused, capable, and undaunted by physical challenges. The trapdoor opened more easily this time, and Sarah descended with her equipment secured in a military backpack. The air quality detector showed normal oxygen levels and no dangerous gases, a good sign that natural ventilation existed somewhere in the system. She documented her starting point and began moving eastward, marking her path with small reflective tabs that would guide her return journey. The tunnel maintained consistent dimensions for the first quarter mile, clearly designed for efficient movement rather than ore extraction. This supported her emerging theory. These weren't mining tunnels themselves, but access passages to reach the actual mining operation while avoiding detection. Historical records indicated that claim jumping and theft had been rampant during the silver boom. A secret access system would have been invaluable for moving valuable ore while avoiding unwanted attention. Approximately 40 minutes into her exploration, the passage opened into a larger chamber with multiple exits. Here, Sarah found the first evidence that she wasn't the first person to discover this system in modern times. A faded canvas backpack lay collapsed against one wall, its material degraded but recognizably from the 1950s or 60s. Nearby, a rusted lantern and canteen suggested someone had used this chamber as a rest point before continuing deeper into the tunnel network. These artifacts raised new questions. Had this previous explorer found what they were seeking? Had they emerged to stake legal claims only to find the bureaucratic obstacles too great? Or had something more concerning occurred, preventing their return to the surface? Sarah documented the items without disturbing them, then consulted the photographs of the ancient maps on her phone. According to the diagrams, the passage leading northeast from this chamber should connect to a larger mining tunnel approximately half a mile ahead. That mining tunnel, if the maps were accurate, would eventually intersect with the main shaft of the Los Lobos operation. Checking her oxygen levels and marking the junction point for her return journey, Sarah proceeded down the northeast passage. The construction changed subtly here, less finished, with occasional natural cave features incorporated into the human-made structure. Water seepage had created mineral deposits along the walls, with crystalline formations catching her light. In brilliant flashes of color, some passages showed signs of hurried excavation, while others displayed the methodical precision of experienced miners. An hour into the northeast tunnel, Sarah's progress slowed as she navigated a section where partial collapse had created a narrow crawl space. Her military training kept panic at bay as she removed her pack, pushed it through the constriction and followed with measured movements. Beyond this obstacle, the tunnel widened dramatically, opening into what was unmistakably a commercial mining operation from the 19th century. Railroad tracks, rusted but still intact, ran along the tunnel floor. Abandoned ore carts sat frozen. In time, some still partially loaded with rock that glinted under her light. Support timbers showed the distinctive notching techniques of Mexican mining operations from the 1880s, knowledge Sarah had acquired during a Corps of Engineers training. Exchange with the Mexican military's structural division. "This has to be the Los Lobos main shaft," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Historical records described this mine as having been worked out by 1887, when the operation suddenly closed, the equipment abandoned, and the entrance dynamited closed after all accessible silver had supposedly been extracted. Yet nothing about this scene suggested a played-out mine. The abandoned tools and half-filled carts, instead, painted a picture of operations halted abruptly, as if the miners had walked away mid-shift. Sarah consulted the antique maps again. If she was correctly oriented, the secret access tunnel she had traveled through connected to Los Lobos, approximately 2 miles from the mine's official entrance, which had been sealed over a century ago. The concealed tunnels created a backdoor access to portions of the mine that might never have been officially documented. Following the main shaft deeper, Sarah found mining equipment from multiple eras, evidence that others had indeed found their way here periodically. Wooden tools from the original operation lay alongside more modern steel implements, perhaps from the 1930s or 40s. A rusted Coleman lantern of 1960s vintage stood on a rocky shelf. Most surprisingly, a plastic water bottle with a faded label from the 1990s suggested someone had been here relatively recently. Yet despite these occasional visitors, the mine's secrets remained largely intact. No industrial equipment for large-scale extraction was present. Whoever had found this place had either lacked the means to capitalize on it or had deliberately chosen not to draw attention to their discovery. Sarah's heart rate accelerated as she recalled the most intriguing notation from the maps. Primary shaft to the Los Lobos silver vein, concealed entrance behind north wall of second explosives.
Chamber.
If the maps were accurate, and if she had correctly identified her location, the legendary lost silver vein, the source that had supposedly been exhausted, might be accessible through a hidden entrance nearby. The explosives chambers weren't difficult to locate. Mining operations required controlled storage areas for blasting materials, typically situated in natural or excavated alcoves away from main work areas. Sarah located the first chamber easily, a rock-walled room with distinctive black powder stains still visible on the ceiling. The second chamber lay 50 yards deeper into the main shaft, similarly marked by chemical discoloration, but larger and reinforced with additional timber supports. Standing in this second chamber, Sarah methodically examined the north wall, searching for any indication of a concealed entrance. Unlike the carefully hidden trapdoor beneath her kitchen, here she found no obvious mechanism or outline. The wall appeared to be solid rock, marred only by the natural fissures and discoloration typical of the surrounding geology. Consulting the maps again, Sarah noticed a small detail she had overlooked, a series of symbols near the notation that resembled a simple coded sequence. The symbols corresponded to features she could now identify in the chamber: a distinctive crack in the ceiling, a timber support with an unusual knot pattern, and a small natural basin in the floor that collected seepage. "It's a triangulation guide," she murmured, mentally connecting the points. The intersection occurred at an unremarkable section of the north wall, approximately 5 feet above the chamber floor. Sarah examined this spot closely, her light revealing what might be tool marks, partially obscured by mineral buildup. Remembering her archaeological training, a specialty that had proven useful during her deployment in historically significant regions, Sarah gently cleared the mineral deposits using a small brush from her pack. Beneath the crystalline growth, a small, distinctively shaped indentation emerged, not natural, but clearly man-made, resembling a keyhole but larger and more complex. Sarah sat back on her heels, considering. The maps mentioned no key or unlocking mechanism. Whatever had been designed to open this concealed entrance was either lost to time or documented in materials she hadn't yet discovered. Tentatively, she pressed against the indentation, twisted, and attempted various manipulations without success. Growing frustrated, she stepped back to reassess the situation. The miners who created this system would have needed a reliable but simple mechanism, something that wouldn't fail after years of disuse or be too complicated to remember. As she swept her light across the chamber again, a glint caught her attention, something metallic embedded in one of the support beams, partially concealed by a wooden brace. Closer inspection revealed an iron rod approximately 18 inches long, with one end shaped into a distinctive pattern that corresponded exactly to the indentation in the wall. Sarah carefully extracted the rod, noting the craftsmanship that had gone into creating what was essentially a specialized key. With renewed excitement, she returned to the north wall and aligned the rod with the indentation. It fit perfectly. Following the intuitive design, she pushed the rod in fully, then rotated it counterclockwise until she felt a mechanical resistance, followed by a pronounced click that resonated through the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound of stone against stone, a section of the wall, roughly 3 feet wide, began to pivot inward, revealing a dark passage beyond. The concealed door, essentially a stone pivot block, was a masterpiece of 19th century engineering, balanced so precisely that even after more than a century, the mechanism functioned smoothly. Unbelievable, Sarah breathed as cool air flowed from the opening. Her light revealed a narrower tunnel extending beyond, its walls smoother than the main mine shaft and glittering with unmistakable veins of mineral deposits. Even to her untrained eye, the silver content was obvious and extensive. This wasn't just any hidden passage. This was the legendary lost vein that had made Los Lobos briefly famous before its supposed depletion. Creating and narrating this story took us significant research and production time. If you're enjoying it so far, please hit the subscribe button and notification bell. It really helps our channel continue creating this content. Now back to Sarah's incredible discovery. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. The official history claimed the Los Lobos mine had played out naturally, with all accessible silver extracted before its closure. Yet here was clear evidence of deliberate concealment. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide the mine's richest vein while creating the impression that the operation was no longer viable. A sudden thought stopped her cold. Property, rights and legal ownership. Who actually owned the mineral rights to this land now? Her property encompassed the hidden access tunnels, but the mine itself extended beneath what was now national forest land. Mining claims from the 1880s had likely lapsed or been transferred countless times through the decades. The legal entanglements would be immense, potentially involving federal agencies, state mining authorities, and possibly descendants of the original claim holders. Sarah documented the hidden vein entrance with photographs and collected several small samples of ore-bearing rock for later analysis, being careful not to disturb the site more than necessary. Professional ethics and legal considerations aside, there was a historical mystery here that deserved proper investigation. Who had concealed this valuable resource, and why? How had knowledge of its existence been preserved in the maps she found, yet somehow kept from wider discovery? Checking her watch, Sarah realized with alarm that she had been underground for over 5 hours. The return journey would take at least 2 hours, leaving her little margin before her sons returned home. With reluctance, she secured the stone door mechanism to ensure it could be reopened later, then began her return journey through the main mine shaft and access tunnels, following her marked path. The physical exertion of the return trip provided space for her thoughts to organize around the magnitude of her discovery. Beyond potential financial implications, which could be substantial if mineral rights could be legally established, there was significant historical value. The concealed Los Lobos vein represented a missing piece of southwestern mining history, one that rewrote the accepted narrative of boom and bust silver operations in territorial New Mexico. Emerging from the trapdoor into her kitchen, Sarah was struck by the surreal contrast between the historic significance below and the mundane repair work surrounding her. Dust-covered tools and building materials lay where she had left them that morning, the renovation project now seeming almost trivial compared to what lay beneath. After securing the trapdoor and replacing the temporary flooring, Sarah showered and changed, then drove to the end of their long driveway to meet her son's ride. The normalcy of greeting teenagers, complaining about calculus, and annoying customers felt like a tether to reality after the almost dreamlike exploration of the morning. "You look weird," Ryan observed, with a 14-year-old's blunt perception, as they walked back to the trailer, like when you got that commendation in Afghanistan and tried to pretend it wasn't a big deal. Sarah smiled, amazed at her younger son's perceptiveness. "Just made some interesting discoveries about the house today. Nothing certain yet, but potentially promising." Jake, the more practical of the two, immediately focused on implications. Like structural problems promising or hidden treasure promising? Because one means more work and the other means maybe we can get internet that actually works out here. The question presented the first of many decision points. How much should she share? And when? The boys were old enough to appreciate the significance of her discovery, but involving them created complications, both practical and legal. Exploration of abandoned mines was technically trespassing on federal land. Knowledge of valuable mineral deposits carried legal obligations for disclosure and proper claiming procedures. "Let's call it potentially historically significant," she hedged. "I need to do some research before jumping to conclusions. How about you help me with dinner, and I'll tell you what I can so far." Over a simple meal of spaghetti and frozen garlic bread, Sarah shared a carefully edited version of her discovery, focusing on the hidden tunnels beneath their property rather than where they led. She described the construction techniques and historical artifacts, presenting it as an interesting historical feature rather than a potential fortune in silver. "So there's literally a secret underground passage system beneath our kitchen." Ryan's eyes widened with adolescent excitement. "That's straight out of a video game. A dangerous, potentially unstable underground passage," Sarah emphasized, already recognizing the futility of keeping teenage boys away from such an irresistible adventure, "which is why we're going to approach this methodically and safely. No exploration without proper equipment and preparation, and never alone. Non-negotiable." Jake, more attuned to practical matters, asked the question Sarah had been pondering all afternoon. "Does this affect our ownership? Like, legally speaking? Because we scraped together everything for the down payment on this place, and if some historical society or the government can claim it because of these tunnels..." The concern struck at Sarah's core worry. Their financial situation remained precarious. The property purchase had consumed their limited savings, and the renovation costs were already exceeding her careful budget. The last thing they needed was legal complications that might jeopardize their ownership. "That's exactly why we need to proceed carefully," she acknowledged. "Tomorrow I'll go into Socorro and talk with Mariana at the County Historical Society. She's helped with renovation questions before, and she'll know the legal frameworks without setting off official alarm bells." Later that night, after the boys had retreated to their respective ends of the trailer, Sarah spread the maps across the small table again, studying the intricate tunnel system with newfound understanding. The access passages beneath their property connected not just to Los Lobos, but potentially to other mining operations in the area, creating a hidden network throughout the mountains that had somehow remained largely undiscovered for generations. One notation particularly intrigued her: a reference to Alvarez journals that apparently contained more detailed information about the concealment operation. According to the marginal notes, these journals had been hidden beneath the hearthstones for safekeeping. Sarah's renovation work hadn't yet extended to the collapsed fireplace in what had once been the ranch house's main room, but this reference provided clear direction for her next investigation. Sleep proved elusive again, as Sarah's mind cycled through scenarios and implications. By dawn, she had formulated a methodical approach, beginning with historical and legal research before conducting any further physical exploration. The Corps of Engineers had taught her to gather comprehensive intelligence before committing to action, a principle that had served her well in military operations and civilian life alike. After sending the boys off to school, Sarah drove the 30 minutes into Socorro, parking outside the small adobe building that housed both the County Historical Society and the local mining museum. The facility opened at 9 a.m., but Sarah had called ahead, asking Mariana Vasquez if they could meet earlier to discuss an unusual historical feature discovered during renovation. Mariana, a 60-something former geology professor with silver-streaked black hair perpetually escaping its bun, waited on the museum's small porch with 2 steaming cups of coffee. In the month since purchasing the ranch, Sarah had consulted her several times about appropriate restoration techniques for the historic structure, finding in the older woman both expertise and genuine excitement about preserving local heritage. "You sounded mysterious on the phone," Mariana observed, handing Sarah a mug of coffee strong enough to pass military standards. "Found something interesting in those old walls." "Under them, actually," Sarah replied, taking a sip of the potent brew. "What can you tell me about Los Lobos mine? The historical record, specifically around its closure?" Mariana's eyebrows rose with interest. Unusual question for a kitchen renovation. Los Lobos was one of the more productive silver operations in the region until it suddenly played out in 1887. The official record indicates the veins were exhausted, the entrance was sealed for safety, and the operation's owner, a man named Frederick Chambers, moved on to copper mining in Arizona. And that's the accepted historical narrative. No controversies or alternative theories. Mariana studied Sarah with increased curiosity. "Well, there have always been rumors. Los Lobos produced remarkably high-quality silver for nearly 5 years, then supposedly exhausted overnight, unusual for a deposit of that type. Some speculated that Chambers had found something so valuable he closed the operation to prevent others from discovering it. Others suggested claim disputes or even murder were behind the abrupt shutdown. Why do you ask?" Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Mariana had proven trustworthy and knowledgeable, but full disclosure of her discovery carried risks. Instead, she opted for a hypothetical approach. The renovation exposed some unusual structural features that might connect to mining history. "Before I go further or contact any authorities, I need to understand the legal framework. If someone discovered, say, historical mining documents or evidence of undocumented tunnels on private property, what would be the legal obligations?" Mariana's expression shifted from curious to cautious. "That would depend on several factors. Historical documents generally belong to the property owner, unless they have clear provenance connecting them to public institutions. Undocumented tunnels on private land typically fall under the owner's responsibility, though safety concerns might trigger inspection requirements." She paused, eyeing Sarah thoughtfully. "However, if these hypothetical tunnels connect to abandoned mining operations, particularly those extending beneath public lands, the situation becomes considerably more complex. Mineral rights, safety regulations, and historical preservation statutes would all come into play." "What about mineral rights for an old ranch property?" Sarah asked, maintaining her casual tone despite the importance of the question. Would those automatically transfer with land ownership, or could they have been separated at some point? Mariana's eyes narrowed slightly, professional interest clearly piqued by the specific nature of these hypothetical questions. In New Mexico, mineral rights can be severed from surface rights, meaning someone could own the land while someone else owns what's beneath it. When was your property last transferred before you purchased it? Bank foreclosure from the Martinez family, who had owned it since the 1950s. Before that, county records show it belonged to the Alvarez family from around 1890 to 1953. Alvarez, Mariana repeated, the name clearly registering significance. Interesting. Diego Alvarez was Frederick Chambers' foreman at Los Lobos. After the mine closed, local records show he purchased a small ranch property, which could very well be your land. The timing aligns perfectly. This confirmation accelerated Sarah's pulse. The mysterious Alvarez journals mentioned in the map annotations likely belonged to this same foreman, a man positioned to have inside knowledge of whatever had actually happened at Los Lobos. Would the mineral rights have been explicitly addressed in the original property transfer to Alvarez? Sarah pressed. Mariana stood, motioning Sarah to follow her into the museum's small research room. Let's check the county archives. I've been digitizing the territorial records for years. If there was anything unusual about that transaction, it might be documented. The research room contained 3 aging computers and shelves of carefully preserved documents. Mariana navigated through digital folders with the efficiency of someone who had created the organizational system herself, eventually pulling up scanned images of handwritten property records from the 1890s. Here we are, transfer of deed for the Esperanza Ranch property, approximately 50 acres, from the Territorial Land Office to Diego Alvarez, dated November 1890. Mariana adjusted, her reading glasses scanning the old document. Interesting indeed. There's a specific clause here stating that all mineral rights are included in perpetuity, with unusually explicit language preventing future separation of surface and mineral ownership. She looked up at Sarah, academic curiosity fully engaged. This is remarkably specific for that period. Typically, territorial deeds were vague about mineral rights unless there was known value or previous mining activity. Someone wanted to ensure these particular mineral rights remained firmly attached to this specific property, regardless of future ownership changes. Sarah absorbed this information with mixed emotions. On one hand, it suggested that any mineral resources discovered on or accessed from her property might legally belong to her as the current owner. On the other, the unusual specificity raised more questions about what Alvarez, and possibly Chambers, had known about what lay beneath the seemingly unremarkable ranch. What about accessing historical mines through private property? Sarah continued her hypothetical questioning. If someone owned land with, say, a tunnel that connected to an abandoned mine on public land, what would the legal situation be? Mariana sighed, removing her glasses. You're venturing into complicated territory. Abandoned mines on federal land technically fall under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, depending on location. Entering such mines without permits is trespassing, even if access is through private property. She leaned closer, her voice lowering slightly. Sarah, these questions suggest you found something significant. If you're comfortable sharing the actual details, I might be better positioned to help navigate the historical and legal implications. Decision time. Mariana had already provided valuable information and had demonstrated both knowledge and discretion in previous interactions. The complexity of Sarah's discovery clearly required expert guidance. I found a hidden tunnel system beneath my kitchen floor, Sarah admitted, watching Mariana's expression shift from suspicion to fascination. Based on documents discovered with it, the tunnels appear to connect to Los Lobos mine, specifically to a concealed section that may contain a significant silver vein that was deliberately hidden rather than exhausted. Rather than responding immediately, Mariana turned to a locked cabinet in the corner, retrieving an aged, leather-bound volume with careful hands. "Before you continue, you should see this." The Historical Society acquired Frederick Chambers' personal journal at auction 20 years ago. His account of Los Lobos' closure has always seemed incomplete to researchers. Perhaps your discovery provides context for certain inconsistencies. She opened the journal to a marked page where faded handwriting filled the yellowed paper. May 14th, 1887. The secondary shaft has yielded results beyond expectation, silver content exceeding anything previously documented in the territory. Alvarez confirms the vein extends significantly deeper than our current operations. Decision made to secure primary access and redirect through controlled channels only. Too much at stake for conventional approaches. Sarah's breath caught. The date aligned with the historical closure of Los Lobos. He found something so valuable, he shut down public operations to conceal it. So it would appear, Mariana agreed. Subsequent entries become deliberately vague, with references to the arrangement and secured assets, but no specific mentions of mining activities. Historians have speculated about everything from criminal conspiracy to a secret government and project, but without corroborating evidence, these remained mere theories. Sarah described her discovery in greater detail. The hidden tunnels, the maps, the concealed entrance to the lost silver vein, and the mention of Alvarez journals supposedly hidden within the ranch house. With each revelation, Mariana's professional demeanor gave way to genuine excitement. This is potentially the most significant historical discovery in the region in decades, she said when Sarah finished. It challenges the accepted narrative about Los Lobos and territorial mining operations. From a historical perspective alone, proper documentation and preservation would be invaluable. And from a legal perspective, Sarah pressed, returning to her primary concern. Mariana considered carefully before responding. Based on that deed language, you likely own the mineral rights to anything accessed directly from your property. However, the moment those tunnels cross into public land, federal mining regulations come into play. Technically, you would need to file claims and permits for any extraction activities. She drummed her fingers on the table thoughtfully. There's also the matter of historical significance. A find of this nature would typically trigger review under the National Historic Preservation Act, potentially leading to restrictions on development or modification. So if I reported this officially, I could end up with a historically protected property I can't modify, federal agencies claiming jurisdiction over connected tunnels, and a bureaucratic nightmare that could take years to resolve, all while trying to renovate a crumbling ranch house and raise 2 teenage boys on a limited budget. That's a succinct summary of the likely outcome, Mariana acknowledged with a sympathetic grimace, though there might be grants available for historical preservation that could offset some renovation costs. Sarah leaned back in her chair, weighing the implications. What would you do if you were in my position? Mariana removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. Officially, as the county historian, I would advise you to report your findings to the proper authorities immediately. Unofficially, as someone who has spent 4 decades watching bureaucracy complicate straightforward situations, I would suggest a more measured approach. She replaced her glasses, expression serious. Document everything meticulously before making any official reports. Find those Alvarez journals if they exist. They may provide crucial context for navigating the legal complexities. and perhaps consult discreetly with a minerals rights attorney before speaking with any government agencies. This pragmatic advice aligned with Sarah's own instincts. Her military career had taught her that official channels, while necessary, often moved with glacial slowness and rigid adherence to regulations that ignored practical realities on the ground. "There's someone else you should consider consulting," Mariana added, closing Chambers' journal carefully. "Michael Blackhawk. He's a professor of mining engineering at New Mexico Tech and a member of the Jicarilla Apache tribe. His expertise bridges modern technical knowledge and historical understanding of regional mining operations. More importantly, he has experience navigating the complex intersections of private property, public lands, and indigenous historical claims." Sarah recognized the value of this suggestion immediately. Her discovery existed at the convergence of multiple legal frameworks and historical narratives. Having an advisor with experience navigating such complex intersections could prove invaluable. "Would he be discreet?" Sarah asked, the question crucial to her decision. Michael understands that history is rarely served by rushing to conclusions or publicity, Mariana assured her. His approach has always been thorough documentation first, public disclosure only after proper context and preservation measures are established. Before leaving the Historical Society, Sarah had Mariana's promise of confidentiality and Professor Blackhawk's contact information. The conversation had clarified certain legal aspects while raising new historical questions, particularly regarding the relationship between Chambers, the mine owner, and Alvarez, the foreman who had subsequently acquired the property concealing the secret access tunnels. Driving back to the ranch, Sarah mentally organized her next steps: locate the Alvarez journals mentioned in the map annotations, document the tunnel system and mine connection more thoroughly, and consult with Professor Blackhawk about both historical significance and practical approaches to her discovery. The immediate challenge would be searching for the journals without raising her son's suspicions. Jake and Ryan had already demonstrated keen interest in the tunnel system. Involving them prematurely in the search for additional historical materials risked accelerating their desire to explore the underground passages themselves. Sarah arrived, home to find a county utility truck parked near the ranch house, the well inspection she had scheduled the previous week. The technician, a weathered man in his 60s, was just closing up his equipment when she pulled in. "Ms. Connor." "Well's in better shape than expected," he reported, handing her a clipboard to sign. "Casing is solid, water quality's good. Pump needs replacing, but the quote I gave you last week still stands. Could do the work Friday if that suits." "That would be perfect," Sarah replied, signing the inspection form. "Any other issues I should know about?" The technician hesitated, glancing toward the ranch house. "Nothing with the well, but I noticed something odd while taking elevation measurements. That old place sits on what the survey marks as natural bedrock, but my readings show a void space beneath portions of the structure, inconsistent with typical geological formations in this area." Sarah maintained a neutral expression, despite her racing pulse. "The home inspection mentioned possible erosion concerns. Could that explain the discrepancy?" "Possibly," he conceded, though his tone suggested professional doubt. "Just unusual for this region. Might want to have a structural engineer take a look before you get too far into renovation. Old ranches in these parts sometimes have root cellars or storage spaces that don't show up on modern surveys." Sarah thanked him for his concern, breathing easier as the utility truck disappeared down the long driveway. The encounter underscored the urgent need to determine exactly what she was dealing with and how to address inevitable questions as more service providers and contractors visited the property during renovation. Inside the ranch house, Sarah examined the collapsed stone fireplace that dominated what had once been the main living area. The hearthstones mentioned in the map annotations lay scattered amid decades of accumulated debris. The mortar that had once held them in place long since crumbled to dust. Working methodically, Sarah cleared the area, carefully setting aside each stone and noting its original position. The floor beneath was packed earth, typical of many older adobe structures in the region. Nothing immediately suggested a hiding place for documents or other materials. After an hour of careful examination, Sarah's attention fixed on one hearthstone that differed subtly from the others. While most were rough-cut local sandstone, this particular piece showed signs of more precise tooling, with one edge beveled at an unusual angle. When she attempted to lift it, the stone resisted, not from weight, but as if fixed in place. Closer inspection revealed a nearly invisible seam where the stone met the packed earth floor. Using a slender pry bar, Sarah carefully worked around the edges until the stone lifted, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay an oilcloth-wrapped package, approximately the size of a large book. With careful hands, Sarah extracted the package and unwrapped the protective covering. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age, but its pages largely intact. Opening to the first page, she found handwritten Spanish text in a careful, educated hand, dated August 1887. Though her Spanish was limited to basic phrases acquired during military deployments, she recognized the signature at the bottom. Diego Alvarez. The discovery sent a rush of excitement through her. This was undoubtedly one of the journals mentioned in the map annotations. Its placement beneath the hearthstones matched the description exactly, suggesting the other information might prove equally accurate. Sarah carefully photographed each page with her phone before touching anything further, creating a digital backup of the fragile document. Though she couldn't read most of the content, occasional English terms stood out among the Spanish text. Chambers, silver assay, concealed entrance, and most significantly, La Mariposa. This last term appeared repeatedly throughout the early entries, always with what appeared to be measurements or calculations following it. Sarah recalled that mariposa meant butterfly in Spanish, though its significance in this context remained unclear. The sound of a vehicle approaching prompted Sarah to carefully rewrap the journal and secure it in her backpack. Through the window, she recognized her son's friend's mother, dropping the boys off earlier than expected. A half-day at school for teacher conferences that she had forgotten amid the excitement of her discoveries. "Mom, you in here?" Jake called, his footsteps crossing the packed earth of what would eventually become their living room once renovation progressed. "By the fireplace," Sarah replied, quickly brushing dust from her clothes and moving away from the displaced hearthstone. "Just assessing what we're dealing with for restoration." Jake and Ryan entered, dropping their backpacks by the door in synchronized teenager fashion. Both immediately noticed the cleared fireplace area and partially disassembled hearth. "Finding any treasure yet?" Ryan asked, with the half-joking, half-serious tone he'd adopted since learning about the tunnel system. "Just the usual century of dirt and demolition challenges," Sarah deflected, though the journal in her backpack felt suddenly heavier. How was school? As the boys launched into typical teenage complaints about assignments and teachers, Sarah made a mental note to find a secure location for both the journal and the maps. The parallels between her current situation and the historical narrative she was uncovering weren't lost on her. She too was now concealing valuable discoveries within the walls of this old ranch house, continuing a tradition that had apparently begun with Chambers and Alvarez nearly 140 years earlier. That evening, after the boys were occupied with homework in the trailer, Sarah returned to the ranch house with battery-powered lights to continue her investigation of the fireplace area. The displaced hearthstone had revealed one journal, but the map annotations had mentioned Alvarez journals, plural. If Diego Alvarez had documented the Los Lobos concealment operation in detail, Additional volumes might provide crucial information for understanding both the historical significance and potential value of her discovery. Working with painstaking, here Sarah examined each remaining hearthstone, finding two more that displayed the same subtle tooling differences. These too concealed small cavities, each containing oilcloth-wrapped packages similar to the first. By midnight, she had recovered 3 complete journals spanning from 1887 to 1903, documenting 16 years of Diego Alvarez's involvement with what appeared to be a secret mining operation. With all 3 journals secured in her backpack, Sarah retreated to the trailer where both boys had long since fallen asleep. At the small dining table, she spread out the journals under the single overhead light, organizing them chronologically based on the dates inscribed on their leather covers. Though her Spanish remained rudimentary, she could identify patterns in the entries, recurring terms, names, and locations that might guide further research. The first journal, covering 1887-1892, contained the most references to Frederick Chambers and seemed to document the initial concealment operation at Los Lobos. The second volume, spanning 1893-1898, featured fewer mentions of Chambers but numerous entries about La Mariposa and detailed calculations that appeared to track mining production and financial distributions. The third and final journal, covering 1899-1903, showed a significant shift in tone and content, with references to betrayal, government agents, and what appeared to be contingency plans for protecting something of great value. Sarah photographed each page methodically, creating a complete digital record before attempting any translation. The fragile paper and fading ink required careful handling, and she found herself wondering how many eyes had viewed these words. Since Diego Alvarez had penned them over a century ago, around 2 a.m., fatigue finally overcame curiosity. Sarah secured the journals in her military footlocker, using the combination lock that had protected her valuables through 3 deployments. Tomorrow, she would need to find someone who could translate the Spanish text without raising undue attention. A challenge in the small community of Socorro, where questions inevitably led to gossip. Morning arrived with an unexpected complication. As Sarah prepared breakfast in the trailer's compact kitchen, Jake approached with uncharacteristic seriousness for a 16-year-old at 7 a.m. "Mom, Ryan and I have been talking," he began, glancing toward his younger brother, who nodded encouragement from the table. "We know there's more going on with this property than you're telling us." Sarah maintained her neutral expression, a skill perfected during military interrogation resistance training. "What makes you say that? You've been researching mining history. You disappeared for an entire day without explanation, and last night you came back to the trailer after midnight carrying something in your backpack that you locked in your footlocker." Jake listed, demonstrating more observational awareness than she had credited. "Plus, you have that same focus you had during deployment preparations, like you're mentally mapping contingencies." Ryan chimed in, "We're not little kids anymore. If there's something valuable on this property or something dangerous, we should know about it." Sarah considered her sons thoughtfully. They were right, of course. At 16 and 14, they were old enough to understand the complexities of her discovery, and their proven maturity suggested they could handle the responsibility of discretion. More practically, attempting to continue her investigation while maintaining secrecy within. Their tight-knit 3-person family unit was proving more challenging than she had anticipated. "All right," she conceded, turning off the stove and joining them at the table. "You deserve the full story. But what I'm about to share can't go beyond this trailer. Not to friends, not to teachers, not to anyone. This isn't just about privacy. There are potential legal complications that could affect our ownership of this property." Both boys straightened, expressions shifting from teenage defiance to solemn attention. Sarah proceeded to explain everything. The tunnel system's apparent connection to Los Lobos mine, the hidden silver vein, the historical documents suggesting deliberate concealment rather than natural depletion, and the complex legal questions surrounding mineral rights and federal land. So, there's potentially a fortune in silver accessible through our kitchen floor, Jake summarized when she finished, but claiming it legally would involve government agencies, potential historical preservation restrictions, and possibly years of bureaucratic battles we can't afford. That's an accurate assessment, Sarah confirmed, impressed by his quick grasp of the situation. Ryan's focus proved more practical. What about the danger aspect? You said these tunnels are over a century old. Could they collapse? Are there toxic gases or chemicals from the old mining operation? Valid concerns, Sarah acknowledged. My initial exploration showed the main tunnels are remarkably well constructed, with proper support systems that have held up surprisingly well. I detected no dangerous gas levels, but that doesn't mean there aren't hazards deeper in the system. Any further exploration would require proper equipment and safety protocols, which you have from your Corps of Engineers days, Jake noted. That's why you were digging through those storage bins in the outbuilding. Sarah nodded, again impressed by her son's observational skills. My training gives us an advantage in assessing the structural integrity and safety of the tunnels, but it doesn't make the legal complications any simpler. So what's the plan? Ryan asked, the question refreshingly direct after the veiled hypotheticals she had navigated with Mariana. Currently, I'm pursuing a four-step approach, Sarah explained, falling naturally into the briefing format that had structured her military career. First, gathering historical context through the discovered documents, including having the Spanish journals translated. Second, consulting with experts who can provide guidance without triggering official involvement. I have a meeting scheduled with a professor who specializes in historical mining operations. Third, documenting everything thoroughly to establish provenance and historical significance. Fourth, determining the most appropriate legal path forward based on the first three steps. Jake processed this methodical approach with obvious approval. And where do we fit in? That depends on your ability to maintain absolute discretion while following safety protocols to the letter, Sarah replied, her tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. I could use help with documentation and surface-level research. The tunnel exploration itself requires more caution. We want to see them, Ryan stated immediately. Not necessarily the mine part, but at least the tunnels under our property. We should know what's beneath our own house. Sarah had anticipated this request and had already considered the parameters under which she would allow it. I'll take you both through the initial tunnel section this weekend, with proper safety equipment and a comprehensive briefing beforehand. Beyond that, we assess incrementally based on conditions and demonstrated responsibility. Deal? Deal. Both boys agreed simultaneously, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation despite their evident excitement. With this new family transparency established, Sarah shared the additional challenge of finding someone to translate the Spanish journals without raising suspicions. To her surprise, Jake offered an unexpected solution. Mrs. Hernandez, my Spanish teacher, she does private translation work for legal documents and stuff. She's really strict about confidentiality because of her legal clients. We could tell. They're family documents related to property ownership that we need translated for renovation permits. The suggestion had merit. A professional translator bound by client confidentiality standards would be ideal, particularly one with no direct connection to the historical society or mining community. Good thinking, Sarah approved. Can you approach her today? Frame it as ancestral documents that might affect property boundaries, technically true without revealing their full significance. With a plan in motion, Sarah felt a momentary lightening of the burden she had carried since discovering the trapdoor. Bringing Jake and Ryan into her confidence had been the right decision, not just ethically, but practically. Their fresh perspectives and local connections might prove invaluable as she navigated the complex implications of her discovery. That afternoon, Sarah called the number Mariana had provided for Professor Michael Blackhawk. The conversation was brief but productive. He agreed to meet at the ranch the following day, his interest clearly piqued by Mariana's deliberately vague description of historically significant structural features with potential mining connections. "Bring documentation of whatever you found so far," he advised, "and I'll review the territorial mining records for that area before I come out." Sometimes the official archives contain clues that didn't make it into published historical accounts. The next challenge was creating a translated copy of at least portions of the journals before meeting with Professor Blackhawk. Jake returned from school with positive news. Mrs. Hernandez had agreed to translate the documents for her standard fee, with a confidentiality agreement that would prevent her from discussing their contents with anyone. She said she could have. "The first journal done by Friday, if we bring it to her this evening," Jake reported. "I told her they might contain technical mining terminology, and she said that's not a problem. Her grandfather worked in the copper mines near Santa Rita." This fortuitous connection reinforced Sarah's growing sense that perhaps the Alvarez journals were meant to be found at this particular moment, by someone with both the technical background to understand their significance and the military experience, to approach the discovery methodically rather than impulsively. That evening, Sarah drove into Socorro alone, meeting Mrs. Hernandez at a small office behind her home. The Spanish teacher, a dignified woman in her early 60s, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, reviewed the first journal briefly before providing a standard contract outlining her translation services and confidentiality obligations. "These appear quite old," she observed neutrally. "Family heirlooms, recently discovered during renovation," Sarah replied, maintaining the property boundary explanation Jake had suggested. "We're trying to determine if they contain any information relevant to the original property lines, which have been disputed in county records." Mrs. Hernandez nodded, neither challenging the explanation nor appearing particularly interested in probing deeper. "The handwriting is clear, and the Spanish relatively formal, educated rather than colloquial. I should have no trouble providing an accurate translation. Will you need certified copies for legal purposes, or is a standard translation sufficient?" "Standard is fine for now," Sarah assured her. "We're just trying to determine if there's anything worth pursuing legally before investing in certified translations." With the first journal in professional hands and Professor Blackhawk scheduled to visit the following day, Sarah returned to the ranch with a growing sense of momentum. The pieces were falling into place: expert consultation, professional translation, and now family support, rather than the need for continued secrecy on the home front. Back at the trailer, she found Jake and Ryan had already begun contributing to the investigation in their own way. Ryan, the more technically inclined of the two, had created a digital organization system for the photographs of the journals and maps, complete with metadata tags for dates, recurring terms, and apparent connections between documents. "I set it up so we can add the translations as they come in," he explained, showing her the laptop screen where images of the journal pages were arranged chronologically. "And I found some free software that helps enhance the faded handwriting without altering the original content." Jake, meanwhile, had been researching territorial mining laws and claims processes from the 1880s. There's a lot of legal history about how mining claims worked during the transition from Spanish land grants to territorial administration, he explained. The timing of Los Lobos's closure coincides almost exactly with significant changes in how claims had to be registered and maintained. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her son's initiative and capabilities. This is exactly the kind of background research we need. The more we understand about the historical and legal context, the better positioned we'll be to make informed decisions. The following morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal conditions for showing Professor Blackhawk both the ranch house and the discovered tunnels. Sarah spent the early hours completing a detailed photographic survey of the trapdoor mechanism and initial tunnel section, ensuring she had comprehensive documentation to share during his visit. Michael Blackhawk arrived precisely at the scheduled time, his Jeep Cherokee raising dust along the final stretch of the ranch's unpaved driveway. He emerged as a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time in the field rather than just in academic settings. "Professor Blackhawk," Sarah greeted him, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming out to the property." "Michael, please," he corrected with a warm handshake. "Mariana was intriguingly vague about what you found, which usually means something genuinely interesting, rather than just another root cellar being mistaken for historical significance." His straightforward manner immediately set Sarah at ease. She led him first on a tour of the ranch house exterior, providing context about the property's historical ownership and her renovation plans before addressing the underground discovery. "I'd understand from Mariana that you have a military background in engineering," he noted as they walked the property perimeter. "Course of engineers, specifically." 8 years. Sarah confirmed, specialized in structural assessment and adaptation in challenging environments. Afghanistan, primarily. He nodded appreciatively. "That explains your methodical approach to this discovery. Most people would have either immediately reported it to authorities or started fantasizing about treasure hunting without considering the historical or legal implications." By the time they reached the kitchen area with its concealed trapdoor, Michael had demonstrated both his extensive knowledge of regional mining history and his practical understanding of the challenges facing private property owners who discover historically significant features. "Before we go further, I should clarify my position," he stated as Sarah prepared to reveal the trapdoor. "As a university professor, I have certain ethical obligations regarding historically significant discoveries. However, I also recognize that immediate reporting often leads to bureaucratic nightmares that serve neither historical preservation nor property owners' legitimate interests. My approach has always been to first understand exactly what we're dealing with, document it properly, and then determine the most appropriate path forward." This balanced perspective aligned perfectly with Sarah's own thinking. "That's exactly what I'm hoping to achieve," she acknowledged. "Understanding and documentation before any irreversible decisions." With that understanding established, Sarah removed the temporary flooring to reveal the trapdoor. Michael's expression remained professionally neutral, but his increased attention was evident as she demonstrated how the concealed mechanism functioned. "Remarkable craftsmanship," he observed, kneeling to examine the construction. "This isn't amateur work or a hastily created hidden space. This was designed by someone with significant expertise in concealment techniques, likely dating to the late 19th century based on the joinery methods." Sarah opened the trapdoor, revealing the wooden ladder descending into darkness. "The tunnel system extends eastward for at least a quarter-mile on our property before connecting to what appears to be part of the Los Lobos mine. I've explored to the connection point and approximately half a mile into the mine itself, where I discovered a concealed entrance to what looks like an undocumented section containing a substantial silver vein." Michael absorbed this information, with professional focus, examining the tunnel entrance with experienced eyes. The timber reinforcement matches techniques used in premium mining operations from the 1880s, not the expedient methods typical of homesteader root cellars or Prohibition-era hiding spots. This was built by mining professionals with access to quality materials. He looked up at Sarah. "I'd like to see as much of the system as you're comfortable showing me. I can better assess historical significance and potential preservation approaches with first-hand observation." Sarah had anticipated this request and had prepared accordingly, with safety equipment laid out nearby. "I've assessed the first section as structurally sound, with no hazardous gas levels detected. Beyond the connection to the mine itself, conditions become more variable. How far are you comfortable going on an initial inspection?" Michael appreciated the professional framing of the question. "Let's start with the access tunnels on your property. Depending on what we find there, we can decide whether to venture into the mine section itself. I've done extensive fieldwork in abandoned mining operations, but I never enter unfamiliar systems without proper assessment first." Equipped with helmets, lights, air quality monitors, and basic climbing gear, they descended into the tunnel system. Sarah led the way, pointing out notable construction features and changes in technique that might indicate different building phases. Michael followed closely, occasionally pausing to examine structural elements or take photographs with a specialized camera designed for low-light documentation. "The craftsmanship is remarkable," he noted as they progressed. "These weren't hastily constructed escape routes or smuggling tunnels. This represents significant investment of time and expertise, consistent with a long-term operation requiring secure, concealed access." When they reached the junction, where the access tunnel connected to what appeared to be the main Los Lobos shaft, Michael spent several minutes examining the transition point in detail. "The connection was created after both systems were established," he observed. "You can see where they carefully removed section of the mine wall to create this access point, then reinforced it to match the original construction. This wasn't part of the initial mine design. It was added later, likely when the concealment operation began." Sarah showed him the abandoned mining equipment and partial ore carts she had discovered during her initial exploration. Based on the historical record, Los Lobos supposedly closed in 1887 when the silver veins were exhausted, but nothing about this scene suggests depletion. It looks more like operations were halted abruptly while still productive. "Consistent with what I'm seeing in the construction," Michael agreed. "This represents a deliberate abandonment rather than a worked-out claim. The historical narrative about Los Lobos has always contained inconsistencies that researchers have noted but couldn't explain without physical evidence." They proceeded cautiously to the explosives chamber, where Sarah had discovered the concealed entrance to the hidden vein. Michael examined the stone pivot mechanism with obvious admiration for its engineering. "This is extraordinary, a perfectly balanced stone door designed to remain undetected while still being accessible to those with knowledge of the mechanism. I've documented similar techniques in some Spanish colonial mines, but never this well-preserved or sophisticated." Sarah demonstrated how the iron rod key operated the locking mechanism, causing the stone door to pivot smoothly despite its considerable weight and century of disuse. Michael watched with professional appreciation, his expression revealing the historical significance wasn't lost on him. "Would you like to see the hidden vein itself?" Sarah offered, sensing his scientific curiosity, warring with professional caution. "Let's check air quality readings first," he suggested, "and assess the structural integrity of this transition point. Hidden sections often received less maintenance than primary tunnels, particularly if access was limited to select personnel." After confirming acceptable conditions, they proceeded through the pivot door into the concealed section. The narrow passage opened gradually into a mining tunnel distinctly different from the main Los Lobos shaft. smaller, more precisely excavated with minimal timber reinforcement due to the exceptional stability of the surrounding rock. Michael's flashlight played over the tunnel walls, illuminating rich veins of ore that glinted in the beam. "This is extraordinary," he breathed, professional detachment momentarily giving way to genuine awe. These concentrations would be considered exceptional even by modern mining standards, and based on the tool marks visible, minimal extraction occurred here. Most of this vein remains intact. He moved closer to examine the mineral deposits. High-grade silver, certainly, but there's something else here. His fingers traced a darker line running through the silver vein. This appears to be germanium, a semiconductor element that had no commercial value in the 1880s, but is critically important for modern electronics and solar technology. Today, this combination would be worth substantially more than just the silver content. Sarah watched as Michael documented the vein with photographs and small sample collections, his methodology meticulous and clearly designed to minimize disturbance while maximizing information gathering. His expertise transformed what had been merely a stunning discovery into a contextually rich historical and geological find. "This changes the historical narrative significantly," he observed as they made their way back through the tunnel system toward the ranch house entrance. "The official record claims Los Lobos closed because its veins were exhausted, but this evidence suggests Chamber deliberately concealed the mine's richest section while creating the impression of depletion." Back in the ranch house kitchen, they secured the trapdoor and moved to the small folding table Sarah had set up with her documentation materials. She shared the photographs of the maps and journal covers, explaining her arrangement with Mrs. Hernandez for translation. "Diego Alvarez was Chamber's foreman at Los Lobos," Michael noted, examining the journal photographs. "After the mine's supposed closure, he acquired this property and apparently maintained the secret access system. The historical questions are fascinating. Why conceal rather than exploit such a valuable resource? What arrangement existed between Chambers and Alvarez that transferred this crucial property to the foreman rather than maintaining it under the mine owner's control?" Sarah spread out county record copies showing the unusual mineral rights language in the original property transfer. "Mariana helped me find these yesterday. The deed explicitly prevents separation of mineral rights from surface ownership, unusually specific language for that period." Michael studied the documents with increased interest. "This suggests sophisticated legal planning. Chambers may have intentionally distanced himself from direct ownership while ensuring the mineral rights remained secured through his trusted foreman. The question is why? What circumstances would make such elaborate concealment necessary?" "The third journal contains references to government agents and betrayal," Sarah mentioned, "though without translation, I can't determine the specific context. The timing coincides with significant shifts in federal mining regulation and territorial governance," Michael observed. "The General Mining Act of 1872 established the basic framework for mining claims, but its implementation evolved substantially through subsequent legislation and court cases. By the late 1880s, increasing federal oversight was creating complications for operations that had functioned with minimal regulation under earlier territorial administration." Sarah offered coffee, which Michael accepted gratefully as they continued reviewing the documentation. The professional rapport that had developed underground extended to this analytical phase, with both recognizing the other's complementary expertise. "Based on what you've shown me," Michael said after examining all available materials, "you're dealing with a discovery of exceptional historical significance. The concealed vein alone represents an important correction to the documented mining history of this region. The access tunnel system engineered beneath a seemingly ordinary ranch house adds an additional layer of historical importance relating to territorial development and property rights evolution." And the legal implications, Sarah pressed, returning to her primary concern. Michael considered carefully before responding. The mineral rights appear to have transferred intact through each property sale, including your recent purchase. Technically, this gives you legal claim to the minerals accessed from your property, though extraction would require permits and regulatory compliance. He paused, weighing his words. The greater complexity lies in the historical significance. A discovery of this magnitude would typically trigger review under various preservation statutes. The New Mexico Historic Preservation Division would have jurisdiction over the historical aspects, while the Bureau of Land Management would claim authority over any portions extending beneath federal land, creating a bureaucratic stalemate that could take years to resolve. Sarah concluded, the scenario confirming her concerns. Potentially, Michael acknowledged, though there may be approaches that balance historical preservation with reasonable property rights. The key is establishing the proper context and documentation before initiating official involvement. He hesitated, then added, there's another consideration that hasn't been addressed yet. The Los Lobos region was traditionally Apache territory before mining operations began. There may be indigenous historical claims or concerns regarding any sites of cultural significance connected to these underground systems. This perspective illuminated a dimension Sarah hadn't fully considered. Would your tribal connections help navigate that aspect of the situation? I could facilitate appropriate consultations if needed, Michael confirmed, though I should clarify that my Jicarilla Apache background doesn't automatically grant insight into other Apache bands. Historical territories, each tribal nation maintains its own historical knowledge and protocols for addressing such matters. Their discussion continued through the afternoon, developing a multi-phase approach that would balance historical documentation, legal considerations, and practical property management. By the time Michael prepared to leave, they had established a collaborative framework that would begin with comprehensive documentation and translation of the historical materials, followed by systematic mapping of the tunnel system using modern survey techniques. I have specialized equipment for non-invasive structural assessment, Michael offered. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging that could map the full extent of the tunnel system without requiring physical exploration of potentially unstable sections. Would you be open to me bringing a small research team here next week? Complete confidentiality would be maintained until we determine the appropriate disclosure approach. Sarah considered the offer. Additional expertise would certainly accelerate proper documentation, though expanding the circle of knowledge increased potential complications. What would you tell your team about the purpose of the survey? Only that we're documenting historical, structural features for preservation assessment, technically accurate, without revealing the full significance until necessary. My graduate students are accustomed to working on sensitive archaeological sites where discretion is essential. The proposal made practical sense. All right, Sarah agreed, but I'd like to be involved in all aspects of the survey and to review any documentation before it leaves the property. Absolutely, Michael assured her. This remains your discovery, with all the responsibilities and rights that entails. My role is advisory and supportive, not appropriative. As they walked to his vehicle, Michael paused for a final observation. You know, there's profound historical symmetry here. A century ago, Frederick Chambers and Diego Alvarez created an elaborate system to protect what they considered valuable, not just the silver itself, but knowledge of its existence. Now you face similar decisions about how to protect and potentially utilize what they preserved. This perspective resonated with Sarah. I've been thinking along similar lines. Whatever circumstances led them to conceal rather than exploit these resources, they clearly intended preservation for future access rather than permanent abandonment. The question is whether their concept of appropriate future utilization aligns with our modern options. That, Michael acknowledged with a thoughtful nod, is precisely the kind of historical question that makes this discovery so compelling beyond its obvious mineral value. You're not just dealing with silver deposits, you're engaging with the continuation of a historical narrative that was deliberately suspended in the 1880s. After Michael's departure, Sarah found Jake and Ryan waiting expectantly in the trailer, their afternoon school bus having arrived during the final minutes of the professor's visit. "So," Jake prompted immediately, "what did the expert say?" Sarah couldn't help smiling at their barely contained curiosity. "He confirmed most of our initial assessments. The tunnel system and concealed mine section are historically significant, well constructed, and contain what appears to be a substantial silver vein with additional valuable minerals. He's offered to bring specialized equipment next week to conduct a comprehensive survey without requiring extensive physical exploration of potentially unstable sections." "Did he say anything about the legal situation?" Ryan asked, demonstrating his practical focus. "He believes our mineral rights are legally valid based on the property deed language, though extraction would require permits and regulatory compliance. The historical significance creates more complex considerations involving state preservation authorities and federal land management agencies." Jake processed this information with visible concentration. "So basically, we own a potentially valuable resource that we can't easily access because of historical preservation concerns and regulatory complications." "That's a fair summary," Sarah acknowledged, though Professor Blackhawk suggested there might be approaches that balance preservation with reasonable property rights, particularly with proper documentation and contextual understanding established. First, Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, finally voiced the question that clearly troubled him. "Mom, what happens if word gets out before we've figured out the legal protection part? Could someone try to take control of the mine or challenge our ownership?" The question demonstrated impressive foresight for a 14-year-old. "That's a legitimate concern," Sarah confirmed. "Mining history is full of claim disputes and legal battles over valuable discoveries. It's precisely why we're being methodical and discreet while gathering proper documentation and expert guidance." This security consideration prompted a family council meeting over dinner, establishing clear protocols for property access and information sharing. They agreed that no one beyond their approved experts would be permitted near the trapdoor location. Renovation contractors would always be accompanied when working in the kitchen area, and all documentation would remain secured in Sarah's footlocker when not actively being reviewed. Later that evening, as the boys completed homework assignments, Sarah sat at the trailer's small table, reviewing her notes from Michael's visit. His expertise had confirmed her initial assessments while adding valuable historical context and technical insights. Most significantly, his balanced approach to the competing interests of historical preservation, property rights, and appropriate utilization aligned with her own instincts about how to proceed. A text message alert interrupted her review. Mrs. Hernandez had completed an initial translation of several key sections from the first journal and could provide them tomorrow after school. This accelerated timeline would provide valuable context before Michael returned with his survey equipment, potentially filling crucial gaps in their understanding of the concealment operation's original purpose. Sarah found herself contemplating the parallels between her current situation and what Diego Alvarez must have experienced after accepting responsibility for the concealed mining access on his newly acquired property. Both had military backgrounds. Historical records mentioned Alvarez had served in territorial militia units before becoming a mine foreman. Both faced decisions balancing legal complexities, financial considerations, and ethical responsibilities. And both operated in transitional periods where regulatory frameworks and governance structures were evolving rapidly. The similarity sparked a new line of thinking. If Alvarez had maintained the secret access system for years after the official closure of Los Lobos, he must have developed sustainable approaches to utilizing the resources while maintaining necessary discretion. His journals might contain not just historical documentation, but practical precedents for navigating the very challenges she now faced. With renewed purpose, Sarah created a comprehensive list of questions to be answered through the journal translations and upcoming survey operation. Beyond the obvious historical and geological information, she needed to understand the legal and practical frameworks Alvarez had established for managing this unusual situation, knowledge that might provide crucial guidance for her own decisions. As she prepared for bed, Sarah realized that despite the enormous complexity of her discovery, she felt more energized and purposeful than at any time since leaving the military. The challenge before her required the same strategic thinking, technical knowledge, and ethical judgment that had defined her engineering career, but with the added dimension of direct benefit to her family's future security. Whatever Frederick, Chambers and Diego Alvarez had intended when concealing Los Lobos's richest vein, their actions had created an opportunity that had rippled forward through time, connecting their 19th century decisions to her 21st century challenges. The underground network they had preserved now offered her family possibilities that extended far beyond the immediate value of silver deposits. It represented a convergence of historical significance, mineral resources, and property rights that defied simple categorization or quick resolution. The following afternoon, Sarah arrived at Socorro High School 15 minutes before the final bell, parking near the language department entrance as Mrs. Hernandez had instructed. The Spanish teacher's efficiency had exceeded expectations. She had completed preliminary translations of significant portions from all three journals, focusing on sections that mentioned Los Lobos, mining operations, and property arrangements. "Your family documents proved far more interesting than I anticipated," Mrs. Hernandez remarked as she handed over a neatly bound translation package in her classroom after students had departed. "I maintained complete confidentiality as agreed, but I must say, if you're researching property boundaries, these journals contain much more than simple survey information." Sarah maintained her neutral expression despite internal alarm. "How so?" "Well, they appear to document some sort of private mining arrangement extending over several decades, quite unusual for that period when most operations were either corporate-owned or registered under federal mining claims." Mrs. Hernandez's tone remained professional, though her eyes reflected scholarly curiosity. "The writer, Alvarez, seems to have been managing a sophisticated operation with connections to both American and Mexican mining interests, all while maintaining an unusual level of discretion about specific locations and access points." This assessment confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the journal's contents while raising new concerns about maintaining appropriate confidentiality. "Family history can be complicated," she offered non-committally. "Agricultural boundaries sometimes overlapped with mineral interests in those days." Mrs. Hernandez nodded, clearly recognizing Sarah's reluctance to elaborate. "Of course, the translations maintain the original Spanish mining terminology where appropriate, with English explanations. In footnotes, I've flagged sections that seem particularly relevant to property boundaries, though as you'll see, the narrative extends well beyond simple land demarcation." Sarah thanked her, paying the agreed fee plus a generous bonus for the accelerated timeline and comprehensive work. As Mrs. Hernandez counted the cash, she added casually, "If you need assistance with further translations or historical context, my services remain available and completely confidential. My father worked for the Bureau of Land Management for 30 years before retiring. I understand the complexities of historical property documentation in this region." The offer was both professional and subtly knowing, suggesting Mrs. Hernandez recognized the potential significance of the materials without pressing for unnecessary disclosure. Sarah appreciated the discretion and made a mental note that the Spanish teacher might represent a valuable local resource if circumstances required additional translation assistance. Driving back to the ranch, Sarah resisted the temptation to pull over and begin reading immediately. The material deserved proper attention in a secure setting, particularly given Mrs. Hernandez's comments about the extensive mining information contained within. The 30-minute drive stretched interminably as her professional curiosity battled with disciplined patience. When she finally arrived home, Sarah found an unexpected vehicle parked near the ranch house, a county assessor's SUV with official markings. Heart rate accelerating, she parked beside the trailer and approached the man examining the property's exterior foundation with a tablet computer in hand. "Can I help you?" she called, maintaining a friendly tone despite immediate concern. The man, mid-40s, with the weathered complexion of someone who worked outdoors, turned with a professional smile. "Ms. Connor? Robert Jimenez from the County Assessor's Office, just conducting routine revaluations of recently transferred properties. New owners often make improvements that affect tax assessments." Sarah relaxed slightly, recognizing the legitimate purpose while remaining cautious. "I should have received notification of an inspection, shouldn't I? We sent notices last month to all properties transferred in the last quarter," he explained apologetically. "But our office is running behind schedule due to staff shortages. I can come back another time if this isn't convenient." "No, that's fine," Sarah decided, calculating that refusing might generate more suspicion than allowing a routine exterior inspection. "I'd appreciate staying with you during the assessment since we're in the middle of renovation planning." "Of course," Jimenez agreed amiably. "I'm primarily documenting the existing structure condition as a baseline for future improvements. Any renovations you're planning would be reflected in subsequent assessments after completion." Sarah accompanied him as he photographed exterior features and measured foundation dimensions, carefully redirecting whenever his attention seemed drawn to the kitchen area foundations. His questions remained professional and focused on standard assessment criteria: square footage, construction materials, outbuilding conditions, and planned improvements that might affect property valuation. "Well, you've got your work cut out for you," he observed as they completed the exterior circuit. "Structure shows significant deferred maintenance, but the bones seem solid. Based on what I'm seeing, I don't anticipate any increase in your assessment value until renovations actually enhance the livable space." Sarah maintained casual conversation as she walked him back to his vehicle, confirming the assessment report would be mailed within 30 days and explaining their phased renovation approach that prioritized structural integrity over cosmetic improvements. Only after his SUV disappeared down the driveway did she allow her shoulders to relax from their unconscious tension. The encounter, while apparently routine, underscored the increasing complexity of maintaining appropriate discretion about her discovery. As renovation progressed and more county officials, contractors, and service providers accessed the property, protecting the trapdoor location would require additional security measures beyond simple concealment. Inside the trailer, Sarah found a note from the boys explaining they were at baseball practice until 6 p.m., providing unexpected privacy for her initial review of the translations. She spread the materials across the small table, organizing them chronologically as Mrs. Hernandez had arranged them. The first journal's translated sections immediately captured her complete attention. May 18th, 1887, agreement finalized with FC Frederick Chambers regarding La Mariposa operation. Terms establish 30% ownership for management services and security implementation, with quarterly distribution of proceeds through existing banking arrangements. Construction of access tunnel from Esperanza property to commence immediately using trusted Mexican crew from Sonora operation. All men to be returned to Mexico upon completion with substantial compensation for silence. June 30th, 1887, primary access tunnel completed ahead of schedule. Connecting shaft to Los Lobos, main operation required additional reinforcement but now secure. FC has publicly announced closure of Los Lobos due to depleted veins, while secretly transferring selected equipment to La Mariposa through our access. Official mine entrance dynamited yesterday, with appropriate witnesses present. Story of failed operation now widely accepted in territorial mining community. September 12, 1887. First extraction from La Mariposa completed. Silver content exceeds all previous Los Lobos production by substantial margin. FC has arranged private smelting through contacts in Denver, bypassing territorial assay offices. My military experience proves valuable in security protocols. Property transfer for Esperanza Ranch, proceeding through Territorial Land Office with special provisions for mineral rights, as agreed. December 3rd, 1887. Federal mining inspectors visited region documenting abandoned operations. Our careful preparation proved effective. They recorded Los Lobos as typical boom-bust operation with no indication of ongoing activity. One inspector mentioned geological surveys suggesting additional silver deposits in region, but noted inaccessibility due to terrain limitations. If they only knew they stood directly above La Mariposa while writing their reports. These initial entries confirmed Sarah's theory that Los Lobos had been deliberately concealed rather than depleted, with Alvarez serving as on-site manager for continued extraction through the hidden access system. The meticulous planning and execution reflected sophisticated understanding of both mining operations and territorial regulatory structures. As she proceeded through selected translations from subsequent months, a clearer picture emerged. La Mariposa, the butterfly, was the code name for the concealed silver vein, chosen because the richest section featured a distinctive wing-like formation in the surrounding rock. Chambers had maintained financial connections and distribution channels, while Alvarez handled on-site operations, with profits divided according to their agreement and laundered through various legitimate businesses to avoid detection. The journals documented production levels, equipment adaptations for working in the concealed space, and increasingly elaborate security measures to prevent discovery. What remained unclear from the initial translations was the fundamental question: why conceal rather than legally claim such a valuable resource? Sarah found a potential answer in entries from late 1888, November 18th, 1888. FC shares concerning information from Washington contacts. New mining regulations being drafted would require 40% government claim on all silver production exceeding certain value thresholds. Legislation specifically targets national resource redistribution from territorial operations. La Mariposa would certainly qualify under proposed criteria. Our current arrangement preserves 70% private ownership compared to potential 30% under new regulatory framework. December 7th, 1888. Reports of increased federal presence in mining regions throughout territories. Resource security cited as justification. FC believes Treasury Department seeks greater control of precious metals to stabilize currency fluctuations. La Mariposa concealment strategy now appears prescient rather than merely profitable. These entries suggested the concealment operation had been motivated not just by profit maximization, but by resistance to impending federal regulations that would have substantially reduced private ownership benefits. What had initially appeared to be potential claim fraud now seemed more complex, a deliberate strategy to maintain private resource control during a period of expanding federal authority over territorial assets. Entries from the second journal, covering 1893-1898, documented evolution of the operation during an era of economic upheaval. July 14, 1893. Banking panic continues to spread nationwide. Silver prices collapsing as government abandons bimetallic standard. FC's foresight in establishing European connections proves invaluable. While domestic markets chaos reigns, our Swiss arrangement maintains stable valuation for La Mariposa production. Most regional mining operations shuttering due to financial instability, while we maintain steady extraction and secured distribution. October 3, 1893, Silver Repeal Act signed. Government abandoning silver as monetary foundation. Regional depression, hitting neighboring communities hard as large mining corporations cease operations. Our small-scale, concealed approach now seems divinely inspired. While visible mines stand empty with unpayable debts, La Mariposa continues producing modest but steady returns, largely invisible to failing financial institutions. The historical context illuminated the operation's surprising longevity. While major silver mining corporations collapsed during the Panic of 1893 and subsequent depression, the concealed La Mariposa operation had maintained sustainable production with established private distribution channels unaffected by the commercial banking system's near collapse. Sarah found herself reassessing her initial ethical interpretation of the concealment operation. Rather than simple regulatory evasion, Chambers and Alvarez appeared to have created a remarkably resilient enterprise that sustained itself through one of the nation's worst economic crises, providing continued employment and regional economic support while visible operations failed catastrophically. The most intriguing translations came from the third journal, covering 1899-1903, where the tone and content shifted significantly. February 12, 1899, FC reports troubling development. Treasury Department Special Division making inquiries about continued silver availability from Southwestern Territories despite official production decline. Specific questions regarding potential unreported operations suggest information leak. We implement increased security protocol and reduce production temporarily. May 30th, 1899, concerning encounter with individual claiming geological survey. Assignment but asking unusually specific questions about regional mineral formations. Claimed official capacity but credentials inconsistent with standard department documentation. Provided minimally satisfactory responses while noting physical description for future reference. FC to investigate through Washington contacts. September 1899, FC confirms our suspicions. Treasury operating specialized resource division outside normal governmental oversight. Similar inquiries reported in Colorado and Nevada regarding operations that ceased official production but maintain private European financial connections. Strategy shift required. The journal documented increasing pressure from what appeared to be a specialized government task force investigating privately controlled mineral resources, particularly those with foreign financial connections. Chambers and Alvarez had responded by further compartmentalizing their operation, reducing production volume, and implementing additional security measures to prevent discovery. The final translated entries from 1903 revealed the partnership's ultimate contingency plan, March 10, 1903. Decision made with heavy heart. After 16 years of successful operation, La Mariposa must enter dormancy phase, federal presence too pervasive for continued safe extraction. FC aging and health declining, cannot maintain necessary political connections to ensure security. We have implemented final protocol, all equipment removed or concealed, access mechanisms secured with redundant systems, and comprehensive documentation hidden at 3 separate locations. Surface property to remain in family ownership with specific mineral rights provisions intact. April 30th, 1903. Final shaft sealed today. La Mariposa returns to her slumber, wealth preserved for future generation when political circumstances allow legitimate operation without confiscatory taxation or federal appropriation. I shall maintain Esperanza Ranch as guardian of access, while appearing nothing more than modestly successful cattle operation. The butterfly's wings are folded, but not forever. These final entries transformed Sarah's understanding of her discovery. The concealed mine hadn't been abandoned due to depletion or operational difficulties, but deliberately placed into dormancy, with the explicit intention of preserving the resource for future recovery under more favorable regulatory conditions. Alvarez had maintained the property specifically to protect access for eventual resumption of mining activities when circumstances permitted. In essence, Sarah wasn't just dealing with a concealed historical mine, but with the intentional legacy of a sophisticated preservation operation designed to span generations. Chambers and Alvarez had created the physical infrastructure, legal framework, and documentary record necessary for eventual legitimate utilization rather than mere exploitation. This realization added new dimensions to her responsibility. Beyond the legal and historical considerations, she now faced an ethical question about honoring the original conservators' intentions. They had preserved these resources through elaborate measures spanning decades. What obligation did she have to ensure their efforts weren't ultimately undermined by hasty decisions or inappropriate disclosure? As Sarah contemplated these implications, headlights flashed across the trailer windows, announcing Jake and Ryan's return from baseball practice. She carefully gathered the translation materials, securing them in her footlocker before greeting her sons. Their excited chatter about practice and team dynamics provided welcome grounding after hours immersed in century-old mining conspiracies and federal investigations. "Any progress on the secret tunnel stuff?" Jake asked as they prepared. A simple dinner of tacos, his casual tone belied by the eagerness in his eyes. "Significant progress," Sarah confirmed, deciding transparency with her sons remained the best approach. The journal translations reveal this was a deliberately concealed operation designed to preserve resources during unfavorable regulatory periods. They intentionally hid the richest section of Los Lobos, created a separate access system through our property, and operated privately for at least 16 years before voluntarily suspending operations with the explicit intention of resumption when circumstances improved. "So we're not just dealing with an abandoned mine," Ryan observed thoughtfully, "but with something people intentionally preserved for future use." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed, impressed by his immediate grasp of the distinction. The final journal entries specifically mention preserving the resources for future generations when political conditions would allow legitimate operation without excessive government intervention. Jake processed this information with his characteristic focus on practical implications. "Does that change our legal position? I mean, if they deliberately created this system for eventual legitimate use rather than just hiding it from authorities, doesn't that strengthen our claim to continue what they started?" The question demonstrated impressive strategic thinking from a 16-year-old. "It potentially strengthens certain aspects of our position," Sarah acknowledged. "The documented, Intention for future legitimate utilization creates a historical continuity that might help navigate preservation requirements. It shifts the narrative from discovering an abandoned historical site to continuing a deliberately preserved operation with established mineral rights. This framing resonated with her military engineering background, where mission continuity often required adapting historical infrastructure to contemporary requirements while maintaining operational integrity. The concealment hadn't been an endpoint, but a preservation strategy, a crucial distinction when considering appropriate modern utilization. As they ate dinner, Sarah shared additional details from the translations, carefully selecting information appropriate for teenage comprehension while building their understanding of the historical context. Both boys demonstrated impressive capacity for processing complex historical and ethical considerations beyond their years. When Professor Blackhawk returns with his survey equipment, Sarah explained, we'll have much better context for discussing potential approaches. The translations provide historical justification, while the survey will establish current conditions and structural integrity throughout the system. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah returned to the translations, focusing on operational details that might inform modern safety assessments and utilization approaches. The journals documented structural reinforcements, ventilation systems, water management techniques, and equipment adaptations specific to the La Mariposa operation, practical knowledge that could prove invaluable for contemporary evaluation. More significantly, they revealed Alvarez had created detailed maps and operational manuals intended for future utilization, storing them in 3 separate locations for redundancy. One set apparently remained within the mine itself, concealed in what the journal described as the butterfly chamber. Another had been placed beneath the ranch house hearthstones, the document Sarah had already discovered. The third location remained unclear from the translated sections, described only as secured with family in Mexico, retrievable through established protocol if necessary. This deliberate documentation strategy further confirmed the operation's preservation intention, rather than mere abandonment. Chambers and Alvarez had created the infrastructure, legal framework, and knowledge transfer systems necessary for eventual legitimate resumption, essentially placing the entire operation in suspended animation rather than terminating it. Sarah found herself developing increasing respect for the forethought and ethical considerations demonstrated by these historical figures who had once seemed merely opportunistic claim jumpers. Their actions reflected sophisticated understanding of resource conservation, regulatory cycles, and intergenerational stewardship principles that resonated with her own values regarding responsible management. As dawn broke over the Sangre Cristo Mountains, the following Saturday, Sarah stood on the small porch of the ranch house, coffee in hand, watching the first rays illuminate the landscape that had become so much more than a desperate real estate gamble. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery beneath her kitchen floor, 3 weeks of research, exploration, and careful strategizing that had transformed her understanding of both the property and her family's future possibilities. Professor Blackhawk's survey team had mapped the entire tunnel system using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging technology, creating comprehensive 3-dimensional models that confirmed both the extensive nature of the La Mariposa operation and its remarkable structural integrity. The concealed silver vein extended well beyond Sarah's initial exploration, with geological analysis suggesting mineral deposits potentially worth millions in current market value. More significantly, the survey had located the mysterious butterfly chamber mentioned in Alvarez's journals, a carefully constructed room deep within the mine where the silver vein displayed its distinctive wing-like formation. Inside this chamber, preserved in specially designed zinc containers that had prevented deterioration, they discovered the operational manuals and detailed extraction plans Alvarez had prepared for future miners. These documents, combined with the translated journals and property records, had provided Professor Blackhawk with the comprehensive context needed for his assessment of appropriate utilization approaches. His recommendation had simultaneously surprised Sarah and resonated with her growing appreciation for the original conservator's intentions. "This isn't a case where modern intervention should override historical design," he had explained during their review session yesterday. Chambers and Alvarez created a sophisticated preservation system specifically intended for future resumption under appropriate conditions. The most authentic historical approach would be to honor that intention, rather than treating it merely as an archaeological site to be documented and sealed. The practical implementation would be complex but navigable. With Michael's guidance, Sarah had initiated the process for establishing a formal mining claim under the General Mining Law of 1872, which still governed many aspects of mineral rights on federal lands. The unusual nature of her discovery, accessing previously documented but deliberately preserved resources through privately owned property with explicit mineral rights, created unique legal leverage that Michael believed would withstand regulatory scrutiny. Essentially, you're not initiating new extraction, but resuming a temporarily suspended operation with established historical provenance, he had explained. This approach acknowledges the historical significance while respecting the original operator's explicit intentions for future utilization. The sound of the trailer door opening interrupted Sarah's reflections. Jake emerged, unusually alert for a teenager on Saturday morning, carrying his own mug of coffee as he joined her on the porch. "Big day," he observed, his voice carrying the weight of shared anticipation. "Life-changing," Sarah agreed quietly. Today marked the first official inspection by representatives from the State Historic Preservation Office and Bureau of Land Management, a carefully orchestrated presentation that Michael had helped arrange after weeks of documentation and preparation. Rather than attempting to conceal or minimize their discovery, they were strategically revealing it through a comprehensive historical context that emphasized continuity and preservation rather than exploitation. Professor Blackhawk just pulled in, Jake noted, pointing toward the dust cloud rising from the driveway, "and looks like there's someone with him." The Jeep Cherokee approached, followed by two additional vehicles, a state government SUV and a more official-looking federal truck with BLM markings. Sarah took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the presentation strategy they had developed. Everything depended on framing their discovery as continuing the historical preservation intention rather than disrupting it. "Ready?" she asked Jake, who would help demonstrate the mapping technology they had used to document the tunnel system. "Born ready," he replied with teenage confidence that nonetheless reflected genuine preparation. The meeting progressed better than Sarah could have hoped. Michael's introductory presentation established the historical significance within territorial mining development context, emphasizing the deliberate preservation aspects rather than mere concealment. Sarah then shared selected journal translations that documented the explicit intergenerational intention, followed by Jake's impressive demonstration of the three-dimensional mapping that revealed the system's extraordinary engineering. When they finally descended through the trapdoor for physical inspection, the officials' expressions shifted from professional interest to genuine amazement. The concealed access system, hidden silver vein, and especially the butterfly chamber, with its preserved documentation, created a compelling narrative that transcended typical abandoned mine assessments. "This is unprecedented in my 20 years with the department," the BLM representative acknowledged as they returned to the ranch house kitchen. Most historical mining sites represent terminal abandonment due to resource depletion or economic failure. This operation was deliberately preserved for future resumption, with extraordinary measures taken to document methods and maintain structural integrity. The historic preservation official concurred. The conservation intent is clearly established through both physical evidence and documentary record. This creates a fundamentally different framework for assessment compared to conventional abandoned mine protocols. After hours of discussion, document review, and continuing site inspection, the framework for moving forward emerged. A hybrid approach that recognized both historical significance and appropriate utilization potential. Rather than choosing between preservation or extraction, the plan would integrate both priorities through phased implementation. The access tunnels beneath the ranch property would be designated as historically significant structures eligible for preservation grants to maintain their integrity. The central butterfly chamber would be documented as a historical mining technology exhibit, potentially available for limited educational access. Most significantly, portions of the silver vein could be extracted using modern precision mining, techniques that would minimize disruption to historical features while allowing legitimate utilization of the resource. We'll need to navigate multiple permits and environmental assessments, the BLM official cautioned. But given the established mineral rights, documented historical context, and contained nature of the proposed extraction, I believe we can establish a reasonable framework that respects both historical significance and legitimate resource utilization. As the officials departed with comprehensive documentation copies and preliminary assessment reports, Sarah felt a weight lifting that she hadn't fully acknowledged had been pressing down. The path forward would still involve complex regulatory navigation, but the fundamental approach had been validated, honoring the historical preservation intention while adapting it appropriately for contemporary circumstances. "We did it, Mom," Ryan said quietly, as the last vehicle disappeared down the driveway. They actually listened instead of just shutting everything down. "We did," Sarah agreed, putting an arm around each son's shoulders. "And we did it right, respecting the history while creating legitimate opportunities for the future." The subsequent months brought steady progress on multiple fronts. The phased extraction plan received preliminary approval, with environmental monitoring protocols and historic preservation conditions that Sarah found entirely reasonable. Professor Blackhawk's department established a research partnership to document the historical mining techniques while assisting with appropriate modernization approaches. Most satisfyingly, the ranch house renovation accelerated with preservation. Grants that recognized its unique historical connection to territorial mining development. By the one-year anniversary of Sarah's discovery beneath her kitchen floor, the transformation was remarkable. The ranch house stood fully restored, its historical character maintained while accommodating modern systems and comfortable living spaces. The hidden trapdoor remained functional, but now led to a properly secured access point with appropriate safety systems for authorized entry. Initial extraction from selected portions of the silver vein had generated sufficient revenue to establish a sustainable operation while funding continued historical documentation. Standing on the front porch of the completed ranch house, Sarah watched Jake and Ryan playing basketball on the newly poured court beside the main barn. Their lives had changed dramatically, from financial uncertainty in rental housing to stability in a historically significant property with educational and professional opportunities neither she nor they could have imagined a year earlier. More profound than the financial transformation was the educational journey they had experienced together. Both boys had developed sophisticated understanding of historical preservation, mineral geology, regulatory frameworks, and ethical resource management that would serve them regardless of their future paths. Jake had already mentioned interest in mining engineering programs, while Ryan's technological aptitude had flourished through documenting the historical systems. Sarah's phone chimed with a message from Michael, confirming their presentation. At next month's historical mining symposium had been accepted, a professional validation of their approach to balanced utilization and preservation. The La Mariposa project was becoming recognized as an innovative model for addressing historical mining sites through contextual understanding rather than rigid categorization. As sunset painted the mountains in the same golden hues that had illuminated her first discovery, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey from desperate property purchase to groundbreaking historical preservation model. The silver beneath her feet represented significant value, certainly, but the true treasure had been the connection to historical figures who had demonstrated remarkable foresight in preserving resources for future generations. Chambers and Alvarez had created La Mariposa with explicit intention for legitimate future utilization when circumstances permitted. More than a century later, Sarah, her sons, and their growing circle of historical and technical collaborators were fulfilling that intention, not through mere extraction, but through thoughtful integration of preservation and appropriate modernization. The butterfly had indeed spread its wings once more, just as Alvarez had envisioned in his final journal entry. But rather than simply mining silver, they were extracting something far more valuable, a model for honoring historical intention while creating sustainable future opportunities. The concealed passage beneath the kitchen floor had led not just to mineral wealth, but to a profound connection across generations of stewardship. As stars appeared above the mountain silhouettes, Sarah smiled at the thought of what might be written in current documentation for future generations who might someday discover their own work. Perhaps 100 years from now, someone else would stand on this porch, marveling at the foresight demonstrated in the early 21st century, just as she had marveled at the late 19th century vision that had made their present possible. Incredible. Stories like Sarah Connor's discovery beneath her kitchen floor remind us that history isn't just buried in the past. Sometimes it's literally beneath our feet, waiting to be uncovered by the right person at the right time. The remarkable connection between a struggling single mom and visionary miners from the 1880s demonstrates how the past can reach forward to transform present lives in unexpected ways. If you've enjoyed this journey through history, mystery, and discovery, don't miss our upcoming stories exploring other forgotten treasures and the extraordinary people who find them. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we release our next video. An exploration of forgotten World War II bunkers discovered beneath a coastal vacation home, containing historical artifacts that rewrote local history. Remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have reported the discovery immediately or taken Sarah's more measured approach? What lost historical treasures might be waiting in your own community? Every subscription helps us continue bringing these remarkable true stories to light. Until next time, keep exploring the extraordinary histories hidden in ordinary places. You never know what might be waiting just beneath the surface.